Welcome to Third and Fairfax, the official podcast of the Writers Guild of America West. I'm your host, Brian Gary. In this episode, Kristina Woo talks with screenwriter-director Sean Baker about his latest film, Anora, the nuts and bolts of indie filmmaking, handling tonal shifts, and much more. Listen and subscribe to Third and Fairfax on Spotify, Apple, or Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West YouTube channel. And now, here's Kristina in conversation with Sean Baker.
Thank you for being here on Third and Fairfax. I want to dive right in because I have a lot to ask you about. First of all, huge congratulations on Anora. I think you're sort of living every independent filmmaker's dream right now. So I hope you have been able to enjoy this time. Has it just been crazy for you, or have you had time to think about it?
It's pretty crazy right now. I don't know what's happening 24 hours ahead. So it's just, getting the film out there. We're in our fourth weekend. We're approaching our fifth of the film, in theaters. And there's also, I assume, a little campaign going on for award season. So we're immersed in that now.
Well, it's really exciting. Really excited for you. Okay, I want to dive right in. I was so pleasantly surprised and really moved by sort of the mix of tones and humor in Anora. I've heard you speak about the home invasion scene sort of being an inspiration point for you, but then also hearing you talk about sort of the lack of dark humor in film in general. And I just would really love to hear sort of how you developed the plot and also balanced all the tones that you have in the movie, because I want to tell you, my first time seeing the film, I was just so freaked out and worried for Annie's physical safety that I kind of couldn't unclench enough to sort of laugh at all the amazing humor. And then the second time I saw it, I was able to relax into the movie and really, really it's your funniest film. And I guess I just really would love to hear how you rode that line with all the tones and just how you were thinking about it when you were writing.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's interesting you say that, because I've been hearing sort of the opposite from a lot of people, saying that they've been laughing all the way through it. And then at the end, they're beating themselves up for laughing earlier and questioning why they were laughing earlier. So that's interesting. Well, to answer your question, I knew I started playing with tonal shifts with Red Rocket, and I wanted to continue that with this film. And I sort of thought of it as a challenge to be able to keep the film going, meaning flowing and moving, even though I might be kind of jarring in the sudden tonal shift or the sudden even shift in genre. So this was in the script. It was in the screenplay. At least it was. I don't know how much I actually expressed that in the screenplay. I think I was clear that the beginning was going to be very montagey. I even the way that I wrote out the individual scenes. They were very short, almost sound bites, they party here, they go here, they do this. So it was clear that the film was going to be choppy in the beginning, montagey. And then when it gets to the approximately the hour mark, the 1 hour mark, we are going into a real-time home invasion scene. And that was clear in the script as well. So this stuff was predetermined, but really you never know how it's going to play out until you are actually directing it on set and seeing it play out. And then, of course, I also edit my film. So it's that, in post-production where you're rewriting basically for a third time and really finding that balance.
Yeah, I had a question about you as an editor as well. Obviously, as you just said, editing is just another type of writing, but did you have different versions of the film where it was more slapstick, less slapstick, more sort of thriller, less thriller? I'm just so curious to hear sort of what your sort of modulation was as you were editing.
Yeah, no, I didn't actually. I take a very unique approach to my editing. I realized that by talking to other editors. I don't do an assemble cut. I go right to a fine cut. So I'm editing chronologically from the first day of editing. I sit down and I'm dealing with the opening title sequence, and I won't move on to the first scene until I polish the opening title sequence. Then I move on to the first scene. I won't move on to the second scene until I polish the first scene. And when I say polish, I mean polish. I mean, sound design as well. And sometimes even if I need to do mock effects, I will. And the reason I think this is important is because I feel like doing an assemble kind of might throw you off. I've done it in the past on a television show and partly with my first film. And it gives you the wrong first impression because obviously it's going to change, and first impressions are everything. And so I just want to see the film grow. I want to see it evolve. So, and that really helps me with the pacing too, because I can feel where I need to change up the pacing. I can feel where I need to suddenly add in the slapstick humor or get more broad with the humor, and then where to bring it back, where to make it more serious, where to make it more grounded. So, yeah, so that's my editing process. It's very weird and very strange. It freaks a lot of people out. Because as my financier said, Glenn Basner from Film Nation, he's like, we don't know whether Sean has made a good movie until the last day of editing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's stressful for me because I'm living for a year of not knowing whether I've made a good film or not until I tag the last shot on and be like, okay, it works.
But you've you've been making films for a long time now. I feel like you probably have earned that right a little bit to have not only final kind of call, director's call on your edits, but like, I don't know, I could understand if maybe you were like a first-time filmmaker, your financiers, your producers wouldn't want that process to be, but if this has always been your process, it feels like it just is like a part of your whole filmmaking work.
Yeah, it's become that. It's definitely
Yeah.
become that. And it's become easier with each one. But I have been lucky. And I think it's also because of the low budgets, quite honestly.
Yeah.
It's when I made Tangerine for $100,000, Mark and Jay Duplass could wait 6 months before I started editing because, it's $100,000. It's not like the biggest investment in the world. So it's like, okay, we trust Sean will eventually get there. And usually I use the festival deadlines as my deadline. So in the case of Tangerine, it was a Sundance deadline. So we were waiting almost an entire year, having shot already in January. We knew we had a year. So I used that. And then with my other films, the Cannes deadline. So yeah, it's getting easier with each one.
I see. Okay, you mentioned a lot of things that I want to circle back to. One of them is like, I feel like all of your movies are kind of about like who the American dream has like left behind. Like Mikey kind of or Annie represents like everyone, like we all sort of wish that we could have one lucky break and not have to worry about life again. But I think like, correct me if I'm wrong, this is your first movie where you show the 1%. And I'm just so curious how, like, were you freaked out or like excited to write sort of for the first time, like exterior Vegas, like interior private jet? Like, how did knowing that the scope of this film being so much bigger kind of affect your writing process at all as compared to all the other films that you've made where you had to really kind of keep everything like low to the ground?
Yeah, to tell you the truth, I wasn't stressed out about it. I had confidence I could do it. Listen, I have friends on all economic levels. I have friends who are barely getting by, and I know a lot of 1% too. So I've been in homes like this. I've been on private jets. I've experienced this, so in terms of like, I've already been exposed to it. So it's not like I found it difficult to embrace that world. I just never thought I would. When I was being interviewed by John Waters a few years ago in Provincetown, he asked me, are you ever going to make a film about the rich? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I don't feel drawn to it. I don't feel the need to. Like and I even brought up the example of like Whit Stillman and his in Metropolitan. And I never just felt, I don't know, I never felt a connection to that world. So I never felt the need to tell a story about it. But it happened. And I think it just happened because there was this eureka moment when I was trying to figure out what Anora would be. I kind of had this idea of this young woman who marries, who realizes that the man she married isn't the right one for her. And it stemmed from a few stories I heard from the mafia world, from the gangster world.
Mm.
And I didn't want to tell a gangster story. And it was during a brain storming session with one of my consultants that I said, well, what can put our young character in a situation where she's not going to marry into the mob, but I want her to marry into something. And then I realized, oh, that's going to be money. And I said on a Zoom, like very much like this, I said, what if she just marries the son of a Russian oligarch? How about that? And that's when our consultant laughed out loud. And she happens to be Russian American. And when she laughed out loud, I knew I hit something there. I hit a nerve, and I was almost validated by her big laugh. And it was at that moment I said, I got it. That's it. And that was us moving. That was when I moved forward with actually writing the screenplay, when we had that eureka moment. So it came from like a high concept idea. That's what got me into that 1% world. It wasn't like I wanted to explore it.
Right, right. Well, that's interesting. I'd love to hear more about just like your research process, because I've heard you say that one of your actor who played Toros, he is Armenian, but his wife is Russian. And so like you're familiar with the world, you were familiar with like the Brighton Beach community. But yeah, I would just love, like, are you reading lots of books? Are you just talking to lots of people? Are you watching films? Like, what do you do when you're researching your projects?
Wish I had more time to read books, quite honestly. I know it's more about like spending time on the ground and meeting people. I think that's the best way, now so back in 07, 08, I made a film called Prince of Broadway, and Karn was in that film as well. He's been in all of my films. So we were thinking about what was next. And after making Prince, I said, I want you to be the lead of the next film. And because he had a connection, well, number one, he's Armenian American. When he came over from Armenia in 1990-ish, he was selling caviar on the corners of Brighton Beach Boulevard just to get by. So he had a lot of stories about that particular neighborhood and his relationship to it. And then he ended up marrying a Russian American. Lana, who plays actually his wife in the church theme movie. So he has a lot of stories from that world. And we were, I over what, 15 years ish, I would sometimes say, oh, maybe I should, get back into that. Maybe that's the next subject I want to cover. And I would hear stories. Sometimes we would hear a story or two. My wife, Samantha Kwan, who also is a producer on the film, has a Russian American friend who had an incident happen to her when she came over from actually a post-Soviet country after the Soviet Union, in which she was held as collateral by gangsters because her gangster boyfriend owed money to the mafia, and she slowly realized over the course of approximately 48 hours that this guy was not going to come and help and rescue her. And she fell out of love with him very quickly. She was young, 19, 20 years old. And she started to gravitate towards her captors in sort of a Stockholm syndrome, relationship. So I found that to be fascinating. I really did. I wanted to tackle that story and fictionalize it and put it and make it my own. But again, I didn't want to tell a gangster story. So it was when we were consulting with that person that I pitched this whole thing about marrying the son of a Russian oligarch. And that's how we got there. And so to answer your question regarding the research, it was really just about, hearing more, bringing people on, spending time in the neighborhood leading up to production. I landed in Brighton Beach about 2 months before shooting, Mikey about a month before shooting. And we had a lot of time to soak it in. And a lot of doors were open for us because the people knew who our cast was in the area, and it's actually famous overseas. Yeah. And then, of course, there's this whole other wave of research, and that has to do with the sex work world.
Right.
And that's totally separated from that world. It was me bringing on Andrea Warehun, who wrote a book called Modern Whore, memoir about her life as an escort and an erotic dancer. And so obviously that applies directly to Annie. She was our chief consultant, read my first draft, gave me some notes, told me what was accurate, what wasn't, what I should add, what I should take out, gave me help. Well, I mean, helped me with slang. Slang is a big thing in all of my films because I always wanted to, I always want to throw out terms and vernacular that you can only know if you live in that world or you're from that world. And then she had one-on-one consulting meetings with Mikey, which was invaluable. So hopefully that answers your question about.
It totally does. I mean, I love that part in the home invasion sequence where like the guys are busting in and they're calling her a whore, they're calling her a prostitute, and she's so enraged by that. And leading up to that, it's like we're seeing her life, we're seeing what she does, and there's no judgment on it. But as soon as these guys come in and impose that judgment, I don't know, I just thought that was like such a cool turn and just a cool like character moment for her. I had a question about, is this the first time you've ever written a script already knowing who your main character was going to be and writing towards that, or had you done that before? Because I don't know, it just like this role, Mikey seems to be so like dropped in to who Annie is.
Yeah, I precast Karin, obviously. Then Yura Borisov was number 2 for Eager, because I had already started thinking about this plot. I knew there was going to be this heavy character. So, and when I saw compartment number 6, I was like, that's our dude. So he was precast. And then Mikey was precast because that was just serendipity. I went to see Scream opening weekend just as we were starting the process of moving forward with Anora. And I saw her on the big screen and I said, she's our Annie. So those 3 were precast, and I was able to write this screenplay with their faces in my head, which really helped. So to answer your question though, it really, there have been a few films. I think Prince of Broadway, because I knew Prince Adu, and I knew I was writing for him. Tangerine, Maya Taylor and Kiki Rodriguez. I had begun research in that world, and I was asking them a lot of stories with my co-screenwriter, Chris Bergosh, on that film. And we eventually heard a story that we found fascinating and fictionalized it and put those 2 in there. I'm scanning my films. I think those are the only ones that had like a pre-casting element to it.
Yeah, because I feel like so many of us writers, it's like obviously we have the ideal people who we would want to cast in the roles, but then obviously reality will set in, and normally you would have to cast someone totally different, and a lot of times there's a lot of like reworking of the character. So it must be just such a relief to know who you're writing for, and have to like not have to worry about that part of the character development, like as you're on set, like as you're in post.
Yeah, I agree. It's truly helpful. I would recommend it if you can. If you can do it.
I want to ask you a question about improv, because I think I've heard you speak about in other interviews, obviously there's a time to sort of like keep tight to the script, and then there are times to explore and play. And I would just love to hear like your philosophy around improv on set and how you sort of maintain the balance between like sticking to the lines, sticking to what's on the page, and exploring.
Sure. So I've made films. I mentioned Prince of Broadway before. Prince of Broadway, I even give one of the first or second, I think the second or third credit on the end credits is the dialogue has been realized through a collaborative working experience with my actors or something, with all the actors. Because that's true. On the set, we had more of a scriptment than a screenplay, where they were paragraphs of what would happen. And sometimes a line or two, when I was happy with dialogue and Darren Dean was happy with dialogue, my co-screenwriter on that one, we would, stick to that. But for the most part, we were basically asking people with the lived experience of our characters to just totally improvise. And it was always dialogue, meaning it was never expositional, because that would change our plot.
Right.
It was always just, the normal conversation, the dialogue that was happening between characters. But that's the only time where it's been full improv. I actually have been getting tighter and tighter, sticking closer and closer to my screenplays with each film. And Anora probably is the one had to stay the closest, and because of the fact that it's linear storytelling and it's plot driven, and it's not like I couldn't let my actors go crazy, because that would definitely throw us off course. However, at the same time, I always find gold, or I always get gold, when I do ask my actors to add some of their own stuff in there. And it usually happens on my like second or third or fourth take. Never the first take. We pretty much stick to the screenplay on the first take. But on the second take, I'll ask for I'm like, if there's any air in there, guys, you can throw in a one-liner if you feel it will fit, or an expletive here or there, anything, a joke. And it really depends on which scene in Anora, because some scenes I went in knowing I was going to have a lot of that, and some scenes I knew we couldn't really deviate much from the screenplay at all, or we would go off course.
Right.
Now, there was also Russian and Armenian, and that adds a whole other element. I don't know those languages, so I had to write all their dialogue in English, and then it had to be translated.
Mm.
And then there was this, and then we had everybody, that was a whole other thing, because, they couldn't deviate far from that stuff at all, besides a word or two, or we would be completely thrown off. I work with actors who are usually very skilled at improvisation, so I want to take advantage of it. And I'll give you a good example of where I did go for almost, relying entirely on one of my actors, and that was Mikey in the beginning of Anora. The first 4 minutes of Anora, before the plot kicks in, before her boss comes in and says there's a dude out there who wants to talk to a Russian speaker, that the first 4 minutes is essentially showing the mechanics of the club that she works in and what a night in the life of Annie would be like. And I wanted to shoot it in a docu-style way. And I was thinking actually very Robert Altman, where I was shooting from a distance and just allowing my actor to approach random people. That's what she does. She's a dancer at an erotic dancing club where it's almost a lap dance club. And so it's a for people who haven't seen the film, it's a lounge type club in which there are girls who work there, and then guys who are clients, and they come in, and there's almost a girlfriend experience where they get to talk for a little while, and then they decide, oh, okay, let's go over here and have a lap dance. So the interactions are usually are the dancers approaching the clients and sort of reading them and seeing what they want that night, what they're looking for. And so in this case, we had Mikey. She was mic'd, wireless mic'd, and she had an earpiece. And we had the club up and running. We had all of our background actors speaking full volume, which is usually no, because of sound recording. Interacting with other background actors and the dancers, and we had our producer in the DJ booth blasting music. And then I just followed with a telephoto lens, followed Mikey around the club, and I would tell her, go over to the guy on the right. And she would be approaching a background actor she's never met before and having to engage in this conversation as if she's Annie, reading this client, figuring out what she has to do in order to get this guy to the private and do a lap dance and make some money off of them. And each person is individual, and each person requires, a different approach, almost a psychological approach. And because Mikey had done so much research in that world, meaning she spent time with us in that club and she had shadowed dancers and talked to our sex worker consultants, she was able to do that. And very naturally, because she understood what these transactional interactions would be like. So that was allowing her to improvise. And I have to tell you, it was incredible. I mean, I wish I could have had a whole short film, a 30-minute short film that just watched this, because I shot 30 minutes of it. We had to whittle it down to about 4, but just 30 minutes of just Mikey interacting everywhere. And she was wonderful.
I mean, that's an amazing scene. Did every background actor have a little directive of like who they were, like if they were like almost as if like they were like at like a murder mystery party, like I'm this guy and I'm going to be hard to get, or like I'm not going to be hard to get. Like, did you plan that out that far, or did like what sort of direction did you give them?
A little bit. And I think, the SAG rules. Sometimes I'm not allowed to talk to background.
Sure, yeah.
And so my AD had to
Mm,
actually give them the rundown. And but I think I communicated it enough to him where he was where Steve was able to 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 do exactly what you just said. Say, you might be approached by this young dancer. You basically pretend you're here on leisure and do whatever you want. And these are actors, they're
right.
background extra actors. So sometimes they would play themselves and sometimes they would put on a character. It was it was very interesting.
I love the part where she's like, let's just go to the ATM. Let's just give our cash.
I love that part. I
That was so
love
good.
that. Yeah.
I have another sort of writer director question for you. I'm interested in how you go about writing and then directing sex scenes. I'm just sort of curious about like what your philosophy towards it is and what your approach is, because like the sex scenes with like Vanya in the beginning are like obviously so different than like the last scene in the movie. And I'm just sort of wondering like, yeah, how do you approach it? Like, is there a lot in the script, or is it just a lot more conversation that you have with the actors between you and them?
Yeah, it's there is a difference between all of the sex scenes in the beginning of the film and that one scene at the end of the movie. And we always consider that last scene, when Mikey and I are talking about it, we're like, that's the scene that's actually like the intimate scene. That's
Yeah.
the that's the scenes in the beginning are literally just like, I don't even call them sex scenes. I call them sex shots. And
Mm,
it's just showing her livelihood. It's showing, okay, they're having sex here, they're having sex there, in this position, in that position. And it's just taking us forward. It's moving the plot forward, basically. And the way that those are done in my screenplay, very underwritten, because
mm,
I know that I have to be in the space and I have to be talking to my actors about how we want to actually show that moment. So in the screenplay, I don't have it in front of me, but it's as simple as Annie and Yvonne have sex in the shower,
mm,
period. Next scene. Right. So then my actors and I go into the space, the shower area, the bathroom that we're shooting in in the mansion. We like, okay, well, maybe we should go from this angle. So it's just going to be they're basically always one shot. And so, we figure it out, we choreograph it. It's very calculated. It's going to be a zoom in here as there's, some huffing and puffing and some, this and that. And it's very simple. It's actually quite clinical when we actually shoot it, because it's by the time we're actually shooting it, it's completely blocked out. Knowing exactly like the frame that knowing that we're going to pull approximately 3 to 4 Mississippis from this moment. And all we need is ultimately 3 or 4 Mississippis. So it's, it's actually the most efficient part of actually making the movie. But to answer your question, the ending was obviously way more scripted, very detailed, even down to some of the, describing the beats and the
mm.
silences and the looks back and forth. So yeah, I hope that answered your question there.
No, and it totally did. It's always just so interesting because, you hear there's always people who are like, don't write too much screen direction. No one reads it anyway. Everyone's just reading dialogue. And then you talk to other filmmakers and like, you'll read their scripts and it's like mostly direction. And I don't know. It's just interesting to me because when you're writing what you're going to direct, obviously you already see so much in your mind. So it's just always interesting to hear how like writer you interacts with like director you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there isn't much detail, especially in the beginning when, again, with those shots, very little detail. Those had to be worked out later. I think there was even one scene that's like, scene 30. They have sex again, period. Scene 31. It's that
You're
general.
like, okay.
Yeah.
I have sort of a zoom out question for you. You've been making independent films, I think, for long enough to see like multiple sort of ebbs and flows in the film business and sort of like independent films place in like the larger entertainment marketplace. And I'm just curious, How are you feeling about the business in this moment, the independent film business in this moment, especially like post-strike and like there's all this corporate consolidation going on? Like, what is the sense you're getting
Yeah.
inside independent film?
Yeah, it's always we're always in a confusing time, it seems, because things change so fast in this industry. I think right in this moment, maybe it's because my film is in theaters right now and
Mm.
people are seeing it and it seems to be getting a really great reception. I feel very good. I feel like, oh, okay, people are,
It's
and then,
alive.
yes, and the fact that, like, for example, oh, like the company I'm with, Neon, they just had Long Legs,
Yeah,
100 million, over $100 million, independent film. I mean, amazing, absolutely amazing. Now I know that's horror, and horror is always a staple that always, always results in, or almost always is box office promising, right? But for, yeah, for a film like mine, to which is, basically a dramedy made for adults without the bells and whistles we're used to now, with all, I mean, meaning like explosions and robots and, all the genre elements of that
IP.
people are now, yes, that people are going to, it's become, it seems like audiences have been trained to say, I'm only going to theaters for those big tentpole blockbuster type movies.
Right.
And it's really sad, and it's like, I'm doing my absolute best to, like, at least what I can do. I'm trying to make movies that I remember seeing in the theaters growing up in the 80s and the 90s, where it was like human dramas or character studies, relationship pieces, film where the I always say, where are the films of Jonathan Demme and Robert Altman and,
Mhm.
and those types of movies? Where are they now? Well, unfortunately, they're living primarily in series form, or, or indies that go directly to streaming. So maybe there is, maybe I feel something in the air. I feel like audiences are hungry for this, and when they're, and I've gotten a lot of great feedback where they're saying, "Oh, what a wonderful experience in the theater, where I was just able to laugh in the theater with
Yeah.
other people, with other strangers, and feel the emotional swells properly." And I don't know, maybe, yeah, I think I know I'm all over the place. I didn't really answer your question there, but I do want to say this. I think the industry as a whole, and I'm talking like every, the higher ups, the writers, directors, we all have to, like, remind audiences, and that there are other types of movies that are worthy of being
Yeah.
seen in a movie theater on the big screen with a crowd. And that means making them. That means filmmakers saying, I want to make my film for the theater. No, I'm not going to do a day and date. I'm not going to do a streaming movie. I'm not
Yeah.
going to do a series. I'm going to make a feature film intended for the big screen. And not everybody wants to do that either. I talked to a lot of filmmakers who really like the new wave.
Mm.
Actually, I've been surprised, but there are some of my peers who are like, I did my one feature and now I'm moving on to a series. That's cool.
Mm.
That's their prerogative. That's
Mhm.
fine. But for the people like me, the filmmakers like me, who have studied feature filmmaking and want to continue doing that, we have to be strong about it.
Yeah.
We have to ask for long theatrical windows. We have to be very clear up front that this film is intended for theaters, and hopefully you make a good enough movie that, will deserve to be in there, and distributors will take that serious.
Mhm.
But it really requires everybody to work hard if we want to save the theater going experience, and we want to save theaters. We're not thinking about the small guy, the little guys,
Right.
these mom and pop independent theaters that are barely holding on. We got to help them out. The chains are getting by, AMC, Regal, they're okay because they have, again, those big blockbusters that'll help them through. But we got to help the little ones. We really,
Yeah.
because we're losing them, and it's going to be very sad if we lose them.
Well, it almost feels like independent films like yours or like Past Lives or, Challengers. It's like the independent film budget is like replacing the like mid-level, what in the 90s would have been a like non-IP original movie for adults. And I feel like every time there's a movie like yours that does come into theaters and does do well, it like reminds everyone like, oh yeah, like people want this and people like it. But then everyone forgets again. Then it's like, oh, we'll make another, franchise movie, or we need to have something that, costs upwards of like $100 million. And I just feel like in that case, do you feel like the independent film like financing landscape is faring any better than like the studio system, or is it still?
Unfortunately, no, because
No,
films are being made for too much. They're
right.
trying to make walk and talks, two headers. They're trying to make what used to be made for under $1 million for 12 million, $15 million now, maybe even more. And I'm like, why? Why, guys? I understand there's inflation. I understand it. But at the same time, I pulled off Red Rocket for 1.1. I pulled off Tangerine for $100,000. Now, we didn't make much money on those films. It's not like we're getting rich off of those films. That's the big problem. That has to be refigured out. How creatives are now going to make money in this new world where we don't have DVD sales anymore. We don't have
Right.
anything on the back end to really help us out. That has to be restructured. And I can tell you sure I can't get into that right now, but I do know that we're going to have to bring our budgets down. And so when I hear Brady Corbett saying he made The Brutalist for $9.6 million, I'm like, dude, exactly perfect. That is great. Wonderful. That's what we should all be doing. My film costs even less. My film costs, I don't know if my financiers want me
We
to
can
find
beep it out.
but let's just say it's about $1.5 million more than Florida Project, which was
Okay.
very small. So I'm still way below 10 million. I'm way below it. And it's like, and I think that's the responsible thing of doing, that's a responsible way of making films. You don't need the trailers. You don't need to pamper yourself when you're on a shoot. It probably will not do you good anyway, because it takes away from the guerrilla making, the guerrilla independent attitude in which, you need to be. You can't be completely comfortable making
No.
movies. They're a battle on purpose, and I think that's where the the gold comes from. That's where you get it out of the struggle. But we're used to. I think we've set up. We're just getting used to these huge inflated budgets, and we really have to stop that.
I think that makes sense. I have one last question for you. I really appreciate you spending your time with us today. Is there a topic or a group of people you're interested in making a film about that you haven't yet explored?
Yeah, I actually had a screenplay 100% ready to go.
Hmm.
It was about drug user activism
Mm.
in Vancouver, in their harm reduction world. Their social services that help people in active addiction. And I've gone through my own uh, personal issues with addiction, and I never thought I would make a movie about drugs because, to tell you the truth, there's already been too many classics, Panic in Needle Park, Christiana F., Drugstore Cowboy. I thought I can never come close to those, so why even try? But then I found this new topic within that world, one of drug user activism, fighting for the rights of drug users. And that I found very interesting. Now, COVID killed that project. We were just about to go, and it shut it down. And that's why I pivoted and made Red Rocket. But I really want to get back to that someday. It's a very important topic that I think is especially now very important because of our fentanyl crisis. So that is the one that I'm looking forward to.
Works. Hopefully we'll get to see that soon. I will let you go, but thank you so, so much for taking the time to speak with me today. Congratulations on Anora. I hope you have a good rest of your like press season, campaign season. Very excited for you in the film.
Cool. Thank you, Kristina.
Of course.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Third and Fairfax. You can listen and subscribe to Third and Fairfax on Spotify, Apple, and Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West's YouTube channel. If you like this episode or have a comment, email us at podcast@wga.org. Also check out writtenby.com, the Guild's online publication, for more on writer craft, career, and union life. And see you next time.